Hi, everybody. It's the Plant-Based Business Hour. I'm Elysabeth Alfano. Happy to be with you today. Okay, we talk a lot about the shifting global food supply system, what that means on this show. So, of course, the changing of CPG, but also new and novel ingredients, new technologies fueling that innovation, even ag tech we've talked about a little bit on this show. But if you change the entire global food supply system, what else changes? Are we changing transportation then? Because you don't have to transport, thankfully, live animals from Australia to the Middle East, which is something that happens now. You could just have a lab where you're getting, whole cuts of meat delivered right for that community. There might be a lab, for every zip code, for all we know. We're going to talk about it. What else would change? Insurance, would that change? Banking, would that change? If you shift the global food supply system, basically, you're changing life as we know it, which is why I want to bring in author of Tech to Table. Yes, so sorry. Author Dick Munson. He is with me today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for the invitation. Good to be here.
So your book, Tech to Table, did come out in September of 2021. And even in those 5 months, so many things have changed.
Yes.
Yeah, it's amazing how quickly things are happening. Before we dive into that, I do just want to sing your praises a tad bit. So I'll go to my handy dandy Adobe here and say, for those who don't know you as an author, you have written many books. This by no means is your first. Tesla, inventor of the modern, from Edison to Enron, the business of power and what it means for the future of electricity. The Cardinals of Capitol Hill, the men and women who control government spending, and on and on. Cousteau, the captain and his world, the power makers inside the story of America's biggest business. Okay, I won't go on. You've got a long list of books. Basically, is it fair to say you are an author that covers innovation from a sociological and historical perspective? By that, I mean its impact on society. Would that be fair?
I like that description. I mean, I've long been interested in innovators. My most recent book, which you noted, is a biography of Nikola Tesla. What a wild man who gave us, electric motors, robots, remote control, what have you. In my day jobs, I, helped launch a clean energy startup. I worked on federal and state legislation to advance environmental entrepreneurs. So, a few years ago, I turned my attention to agriculture because, as you know, number one, it's the world's largest industry. It's like $15 trillion. And it's so core to so many of our key social issues that we face, be that climate change, immigration, equity, health, the list sort of goes on. But the thing that really tipped it for me was that I realized that agriculture has been the world's least digitalized economic sector. Some would say the least modernized. That presents problems for some of the efficiency reasons that you've talked about, but it also opens up a whole lot of opportunities for innovators, my favorite people, to come in and see opportunities to do things differently.
Mm-hmm. I love that you say this because to me, it is gobsmacking. This industry has not been disrupted since, well, I'll say the 40s or 50s, and I may even have that wrong, you can correct me. And it is rife with so many problems: food injustice, food security. We aren't making enough. It's not quality enough. So you're not getting the nutrients, no fiber in meat, for example. You're not getting the high protein fiber that you need. It's costing too much. It's taking land, it's taking water, it's taking time, deforestation, these things that we need to address climate change. I mean, it will be the thing that renders us extinct, I say. And yet we're doing nothing to fix it. I mean, we have these, innovators that we'll talk about today, but on a societal scale, government's been very slow to get involved. Why is that?
I mean, farming is a conservative enterprise. Each farmer every year gets one chance to do it right, and to cross, his or her fingers and hope that, markets and weather are nice to them. So they're naturally resistant, if you will, to new things coming down the pike. We've all sort of seen things that have been supposedly these great new innovations that we would endorse. DDT, even margarine, for heaven's sakes, was pitched as this great wonder new food, or DDT was the way we were going to solve weeds and insect problems. They turned out to be a bust. So there's some natural hesitation when you talk about new technologies, but the litany that you just went through of the environmental, social, and equity problems that conventional agriculture present force sort of a change. I would note the thing that just blew me away is just how much has changed across the board, not just on the move. On your show has focused so well on, plant-based and cell-based, alternatives, but there's this confluence of new technologies in which, ag tech broadly defined has been rising about 80% a year. That's extraordinary. About $30 billion of investment capital, in 2 years ago, and I'm sure last year is going to maybe even get close to doubling that. The change is so unbelievably rapid in how we are rethinking how we farm and what our options are for what we eat.
Yeah, it's really exciting, especially when you see that coming from the private sector. I'll throw out some numbers, at least for our sector, and that is from 2010 to 2019. I get this from the Good Food Institute. The investment into alternative proteins, which at the time was going basically into plant-based, was $3 billion. Then in 2020, it was 3.1. So 1 year, it was more than the previous 10 years. And a lot of that money was going to precision fermentation, biomass fermentation. And now that we look at 2021, it's something like 3.7 or 3.9. I apologize on that number. It's just under 4 again in 1 year. So you see that kind of growth of the billions of dollars going into these novel technologies. And our sector isn't even as advanced as ag tech, which people haven't been investing in for some years now. It's been on the radar.
So you have to sort of step back and say, why now? I mean, we've known about these environmental, social equity problems for years. I look to Eric Schmidt, actually, who used to be the chairman of Google, who suggested that we live in quite an amazing time where there is such rapid and diverse technological advancements. He suggested that there's this confluence in 3 different categories. One is sensors. We just now have equipment that's able to acquire so much data that we have never been able to do before. Secondly, we have these, high-powered computation machines or computers that are able to decipher that data. And then we have, robots or autonomous machines that are able to do, tasks that with speed and efficiency and safety never been done before. So this confluence of technologies, he claims, will totally transform all sorts of industries and create startups that will be, agile and powerful institutions. I think what's interesting is that that's been going on for maybe about a decade, but just within like the last 5 years or even less, that confluence of technologies that Schmidt pointed out has finally reached the agricultural sector. And the change is just across the board and rapid. And the future, to be honest, is unknown, but I think quite exciting as far as what it opens up for solving some of our environmental problems and also offering us more options when it comes to what we eat.
Yeah, it is so very exciting. Many of my colleagues say like, oh my gosh, more bad news today again in the press. And I always say, well, come on over to the plant-based side because we got good news every day. And it's really an exciting place to be. I want to comment quickly also citing an executive. You're talking about how quickly change is going to take place. You're generally talking about ag tech, and we'll just put VegTech into the ag tech umbrella. I was hiking and ran into a Cargill executive who said that they believe the change is going to happen really quickly in the food supply system. And the reason they think it's going to happen really quickly is because there's sort of a crumbling of our current infrastructure. It's just not meeting our needs at a juncture where we can't futz with the numbers anymore. So it's going to become dire, and you're seeing this direct investment into these innovations come from, not just the private sector, but private corporations as well as individuals. So you're seeing big corporate spend to get really ultimately what comes down to a better business bottom line for them, because water is going to be expensive, land is expensive, time's expensive. It's not a great business equation, which is why I'm always surprised that change hasn't happened before now. But I like what Eric says about robots playing a role. To me, I think that's kind of a big part of it. I want to read, just because we're not going to be able to go over every innovator, and 25 are mentioned in your book, Dick. So I just want to quickly read some of the innovations that you touch on in this book so that everybody can go get tech to table. So he starts out the book with alternative proteins. So Josh Tetrick, we all know and love him. He's been on this show. Uma Valetti, we all know him. Memphis Meat, Pat Brown, Impossible Foods, love him. James Corwell, um, Ocean Hunger Foods actually isn't in existence anymore.
I know. It's how fast
Technically, but
things change.
right, how fast things change. Exactly right. Leonard Lair, Back of the Yards Algae Sciences from my hometown of Chicago. He's a beautiful person. He's been on this show. But then you also talk about the next couple headings: reducing food waste, which I think is really interesting. So coating of foods to protect them longer, and robotic picking of fruit, and 3D printing of food to avoid food waste, cutting down on plastic, something we've talked about, so that the packaging is compostable. These are the exciting innovations that are happening in our world right now. Plucking weeds robotically, spraying precisely so that you don't have to spray an entire field with chemicals. You can just spray that portion of the field that is sick, for lack of a better expression. We talked about it with Nate Sepelter here from Sweet Farms, that kind of precision spraying, which is so interesting. Precision watering, that's interesting. I'm sorry to be just reading the list here, folks, but we're not going to be able to, talk about every entrepreneur who's doing these great things, and I want you to hear about it. Genome mapping soils through genomics, which I think is fascinating, and feeding nitrogen to crop and cutting down carbon, all these things through alternative uses in technology to edit genes, et cetera. So really interesting. But one of the chapters that really got my attention was the chapter on blockchain. So maybe you could explain to everybody what is blockchain and why blockchain would be affecting the food supply system.
Well, blockchain means a lot to different people, but in essence, it is a very sophisticated ledger. It's a way to keep track of numbers, of things moving around. And when it comes to farms, what it does do is allow you to get rid of the middleman, if you will, regarding who controls the information, and allow farmers to and consumers and food companies to track specifically and with great attention to detail where their product has come from and how it gets combined into whatever, and where it goes at the end. For a consumer, it's the perfect way to do transparency, which I think is at the core of what so many consumers are now demanding, because they look at all the, the information on boxes of food and they go, what does this mean? Yeah. And, suddenly with, blockchain, we can track what a farmer is needing to provide as far as the specifics of the type of grain that would be best for a bread maker, or a different kind of grain that would be better for a beer brewer. And be able to know for certain that from a consumer's perspective, that's where it came from, and that we've traced its evolution throughout the entire chain until it gets to my table. It goes from tech to table.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me. So ultimately, I envision, I don't know if this is accurate, the end product being such that you walk down the grocery store, you scan a QR code with your phone, and you get to see the grains started in India. They were from a small farm. You might even see the farm name. They went to Mumbai. They were shipped, and so on and so on. They were packaged in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They got on a truck, and so now, why would people want to know that kind of detail? I mean, I already feel like my mind is like, I got too much on my plate to think about. Why would anyone dive into that kind of detail?
Well, I think, some won't, just to be honest. I mean, they just want to go grab something from the shelf and, move on. Others are really quite concerned about, is their food safe? Is it healthy? Does it provide the nutrition that they're looking for? At the same time, what blockchain does is it empowers farmers to know that if they do a slightly different kind of, say, grain, they're going to get compensated for it, because that has more value, because the producer and the consumer knows where it came from. Rather than at the moment, what we do when we think about farming, we think about massive fields of corn and soybeans, and we don't care, that it might be different. They're all the same. We throw them all into a silo and assume that they're just basically the same. But in fact, corn and soybeans and other grains can be differentiated, and farmers rewarded for growing things that are of particular value, say for a beer brewer or for a bread maker who have different needs.
So I want to unpack what you've said there a little bit and readily say to the audience, so I'm a novice here, folks. I might be talking to you about alternative proteins all day long, but this one is a new one for me. So I want to make sure I wrap my mind around it. First of all, I love what you say. You're talking about empowering the consumer. So they say, hey, I'm going to spend my dollars on exactly what I want. And I want to know where things come from, if they do, and what kind of farm this is. I think that's important to people. Is it small farm? Is it big farm?
Yep.
But we're also talking about empowering the farmer. So
Yep.
now the farmer is no longer invisible. And when you're invisible, you have no power. You're perhaps treated poorly. We'll come back to these massive fields and who owns these massive fields, and perhaps why we're changing the system now is because there's very few people at the top who own everything, and everyone's sick about it. So mad about it. So get back to that in a second. But the farmer then, which I always say, farmers now under these contracts that are owned by big ag, they're basically like indentured servants.
Yep.
They get to take more control of this supply and maybe brand themselves even to a certain ingredient, a mung bean or something that's not monocropped, that's not big ag. So I think that's really exciting. And then when I think about this entire supply chain, I also think, well, then a rating system is probably going to be attached to it.
Well, all sorts of different people can come up with different rating systems. I mean, if you are into animal welfare, there will be a rating system that says this particular product will meet your standards. Or, if you're into, a totally non-GMO, there's ways to assure that that's, what you're going to look for. So yeah, there will be different rating systems. I think, going back to sort of your point, is that this gets farmers away from thinking about only growing commodities, of a single monoculture crop. Suddenly you have the option of, growing organic food and making sure that it is organic for the consumers that want it. For thinking about your corn, of having probably 20 different kinds of corn because it can be used in different ways to make, great foods if in fact they're grown for that particular purpose. So instead of just thinking that we have everything's the same, we suddenly have the option for some creativity for chefs as well as for farmers as to what they can do.
Mm-hmm. I love that you say this because I remember as a kid feeling that my food choices were much richer and there was more to choose from. And now I feel like, you go to the grocery store and it's, you've got like peppers, mushrooms, and carrots or something. I mean, you just don't have the choice that I feel like you have. I think there's something like, 300 different kinds of potatoes in the world. But basically when I go to the store, I see Idaho potatoes.
Get a russet.
Yeah, that's right. You're like three types of potatoes. There's sweet potato and then like a big Idaho or a small little potato. That's what you've got. So, bringing back
I can come back. I think what's happening is with all of these new innovators, we're redefining what it means to farm and what our food options are. So blockchain is simply a mechanism to allow us to have a better transparency about through the entire process as to what that looks like. There are others, one, company that I profiled is called Bowery. It's a urban warehouse means of thinking about how to grow, in this case, produce. But they're totally redefining the farm. I mean, we think about farms, you're originally from Chicago. I am at the moment here too. And you leave Chicago and there are these vast fields that seemingly go on forever, vertical, vast fields, mostly of soybeans and corn. But Irving Fain with Bowery is basically building vertical farms instead of horizontal farms. I made a mistake. So that, some of these were actually designed by the makers or the designers of Amazon fulfillment centers. So you think about how massive these things are. And rather than being horizontal, they're now vertical. They're not using soil. They're focused specifically on each individual plant. They've got robots and sensors that look at them. They're using hydroponic and aeroponics rather than soil. So you sort of step back and you think, my goodness, that just is a whole new way of thinking about how to grow food. And of course, as you would imagine, you get a whole lot more food per square meter of, farm space, if you will, or in this case, warehouse space than you would otherwise. And it also opens up the opportunity to grow foods a multitude of foods that you wouldn't otherwise, throughout the year, no matter what the weather conditions happen to be. So I'm intrigued by these people that are totally rethinking the system. In fact, in this case of Bowery, totally redefining what a farm is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love this. And with our worldly problems such as they are, it's redefining so that creativity. I think we talked about creative destruction, but it's also solving some of the world's greatest problems. So you're doing that kind of vertical farming with less, if not no water sometimes.
Yep.
Certainly, obviously, we can talk about the land as you've just done. And also, you're not using soil, so you're not having to have that demand from manure. Manure is just one of those products in the supply
Yep.
chain that is requiring animals. So, you get that out of the system. And then, as you say, you have this diversity because you're not subject to the weather. So the upside is phenomenal. Now, is it something that we can do by building on our current system, or does it take creative destruction? Do we have to implode what we have and start again?
Well, I don't know is the short answer. But
fair enough.
Totally destroying a $15 trillion industry is going to be tough. And it's going to take a little bit of time. But what I was blown away by is just the amount of ingenuity and innovation and entrepreneurship that is going on in this sector, because so many individuals, both investors as well as entrepreneurs, see an opportunity to make money. Because the agricultural system has been so conservative, it has been so undigitalized, it has been the least modernized. Opportunities are enormous. And I guess what I tried to do with these 25 innovators, I could have chosen dozens, if not hundreds of others. And maybe the ones that I choose, as you suggested, Ocean Hugger, it changes. That's the downside, I suppose, of startups. They're hard.
Yes,
some
they
succeed, some don't succeed. But I think I was impressed enough by, particularly from the investment community, of saying there's an opportunity here to redefine how we go about farming and increase our food options through innovation.
Okay. I will agree with you and then wildly disagree with you. So, I think the food supply system so I'm agreeing with you, farming will look nothing like it used to look. So in this way, I guess I'm sort of saying it will implode in the sense that it will bear very little resemblance to what we do today. But I'm I'll use the word gobsmacked again. The business problems are so stark. They've been here for a while, and they're not small. They're global. You're talking about famine. You're talking about waste. You're talking about climate change. Animal agriculture is one of the leading causes of climate change. According to the FAO of the UN, it emits 14.5% of greenhouse gases. I mean, we've known this for a very long time. Why has disruption taken so long? And I would say that it's the forces in play that keep real progress, real innovation, and real solution from happening. Because what does business do really well? It takes a problem, it solves it at global scale. Business does that really well. It's been thwarted for a long time. How are we going to get over the hurdles in place that have been holding us back?
Well, I'd come back and note that, part of the problem is that farming is just a conservative practice because you don't get many options to do it well. And you are naturally cautious about something new because it takes an investment. That said, I think what some of these entrepreneurs are doing are providing opportunities for rural communities to revitalize themselves. They're providing opportunities to farmers. The ones, when I talk to farmers, I get, there's two totally different views. One is, all this new stuff, it's complicated, it's very expensive, there's no way I'm going to, risk my capital on doing this. And others are saying, oh my gosh, this is a way to, invigorate my own children so that they'll stay on the farm. It'll mean more options for future generations. It'll mean that my small community is revitalized. So you've got these two different sides. I think the latter side is going to win hands down, but it's going to take a while for people to sort of change in the ag community to open up to change. But I think it's going to overwhelm them because the increased efficiency and the way that it tackles numerous of our just international problems is just so profound that it can't be ignored.
And an added boost, as you say, is these communities having the chance to be revitalized. They're obviously rural communities. There's often usually a large university in
Mhm,
these rural communities, and there's
mhm.
that chance to share information. It's almost ridiculous that there hasn't been that sharing between, these universities that put out the big scientific papers and the
Yep.
PhDs that are working on huge ag tech issues that don't even get filtered down to the communities right next door to them. And so there's this opportunity for the sharing of information there. As ultimately, I think big ag will go away. I don't know. Will the powers that are, the 4 or 5 that run it all, are they going to maintain power?
Again, the honest answer is I don't know.
Yeah, of course.
But
Yeah.
that said, I think you talk to these entrepreneurs, and as you well know, I mean, they're an arrogant um, group of driven individuals,
Chutzpah for
and
sure.
and their general attitude is the big ag has become stodgy oligopolies that we're going to just run circles around. We will outcompete them. Now, is that true across the board? No, there are going to be entrepreneurs who look, to the Cargills and Deeres and other places for investment capital, or Deere or Cargill, or I don't mean to pick on anybody, but I mean, any large firm can see an opportunity and want to be part of it. That said, I think that the thing that surprised me about the entrepreneurs that I ran into is they really are an independent cusses, and they don't think that they want to be under the control of a large corporation, that they're going to scruffily make their way and build this vision, idealistic vision of a future, and outcompete big ag in the process.
Well, it's for certainly, I feel that we are in a moment where the David of the David and Goliath scenario has more power and
Yeah.
perhaps a bigger slingshot than they used to, thanks to technology and the transparency that we already have in our system with social media, et cetera, and how quickly information
Yes.
transfers from one person to the next. So they're empowered in a way that they never have been before. But I think there's also a hesitancy to become involved with the major food players. I'll sort of take myself away from the major ag players and go sort the food players, um, because it's a little bit like dancing with the devil in that there's a lot of mistrust of
Yep.
large food corporations. I recently interviewed Jeremy Collar, the managing partner of Collar Capital and the funder of FAIR, Farm Animal Investment Risk and Return Initiative. And he said that Tyson produces more excrement on a yearly basis than the entire United States of people.
Wow.
And you think, like, where does that excrement go? It's not treated. It's, we're talking about severe damage to the surrounding communities of
Yes.
these CAFOs, concentrated animal farming organizations. So all this is to say, I think there's a reason to not want to be in bed with those that have a very bad reputation. So in other words, long story short, is the question to you is, how do we get back the consumer's trust?
Well, I think the emerging entrepreneurs have to be unbelievably transparent, and honest about what their ingredients are, how they are producing the food that they're providing, and the whole process by which it gets to somebody's table. Um, if you're trying to hide behind something, I think at this point with data seeking, truth seeking consumers, it's really not going to work. The other thing that just sort of circling back to where you were going, I was also thinking about the role of government here. Um,
Mm-hmm.
there are some within the entrepreneurial community who are, to be honest, they, although they are true environmentalists and, they're focused on social equity. And so you would think that they're liberals in the broad sort of sense. But in many ways, they're conservative business people that are thinking, I don't really want the government telling me what to do or giving me, having me rely upon government taxpayer subsidies to do things. I want the markets to work. And
Mm-hmm.
so the role of how do you get, from their perspective, how do you get the government out of the business of subsidizing the status quo and opening the door for entrepreneurs to be able to compete fairly? So is it patent laws? Yeah, there's probably some need for reforms of that. Is it getting rid of subsidies? They would certainly welcome it. The only thing that I think that they look to the government for, that I found consistently, is to provide some infrastructure, particularly digitalized infrastructure, to rural communities, so that some of these technologies, have the capacity to be able to perform, by having 5G wireless in rural communities, so that the technologies will work and the communities will be revitalized. But the role of government is going to be a very interesting one going forward, because there's obviously, as in the, plant-based and cell-based industry, there's a lot of regulatory, hurdles that everybody's having to jump through. I mean, Singapore was probably the only one to date that's, allowed it. Will that change? Yes. Is it important for, some, independent body to provide oversight to make sure that these companies are doing what they say they will when it comes to sustainability and equity? Yes. But government at the moment has been, at least from the environment in entrepreneurs' perspective, a barrier, or a defender of the status quo, which means it puts them at a disadvantage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say government engaging in unfair business practices by making an unlevel playing field with subsidizing some players but not others is really a hindrance to the markets as we know them and the power of the markets to work efficiently. And they're part of the real hurdle in that they allow lobbyists to basically get their way and are anti-consumer in that way. And the true entrepreneur is all about the consumer. I want to read a quote from your book about the power of subsidies and really kind of the scale that what we're talking about. Growers and owners of farmland annually obtain $25 billion in cash payments from the most recent farm bill. In 2018 and 2019, they gained an extra $28 billion to compensate for China's refusal to buy U.S. crops in retaliation for the Donald Trump administration's tariffs. That's far more than was provided to the failing automotive industry during the 2008 financial crisis. Acknowledging the farm lobby's political clout, economists at Kansas State University calculate that the extra government funds offered in 2018 were 8 times what the trade wars actually cost farmers. So you see what a political scenario this becomes. And then it goes on to say that in the 2020 election, Trump showered another $46 billion on his rural base in the South and in the Midwest, implying that he was ensuring votes there. So you see how political it can be. And
it's not one political party. I didn't mean to suggest it's the Republicans or the Democrats that are doing this.
Agreed.
It's a bipartisan shower of subsidies on the status quo because they are, big ag has figured out how to play the political game, and that's not a criticism. That's how our system works. All I'm saying is that entrepreneurs and everybody has their definition of what is a level playing field. Trust me, but I think that's the goal that I think innovators or inventors would like to see. To have this is going to change. The ag system is going to change. I think these people would argue because of business, not because hoping the government gets out of the way and allows the free market to do what it does best.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say governments are going to be the last to get on board. Per your comment about Democrat versus Republican, Biden has put in Tom Vilsack, who's been a long time dairy lobby individual as director of agriculture. So you see that it is really across the aisle, that the farm lobby reaches across the aisle, and
Very
both
true.
are succumb to that. But I think it'll be interesting if politicians finally get the memo when they realize that their own jobs are at stake. We talked about this a little bit before we started the show. I think wars are going to be fought over food and water, and those who control the food. And I looked at China already doing that. In Time magazine, it was covered that China put cultivated meat into its 5-year agricultural plan. I think when you start looking at a country the size of China feeding 1.4 billion on its own, potentially, if it harnesses the technology, it does not have to play nice in trade talks. If it's no longer requiring to trade you for food, the world looks a lot different under that scenario. Right now, China can't feed itself, obviously has to trade with us and others for food. So
one part of
very
innovation is that it opens up opportunities for all sorts of different countries to do things, because in not all cases, but in many cases, it provides a more efficient and a more economic way to go about producing food. So I think it somewhat levels the playing field from a diplomatic or international perspective that developing countries using some of these innovations, can suddenly start playing in a way that they haven't been able to on an international scale before.
Yeah, this is very interesting. So we're going off the reservation, folks. This was not discussed in his book. So, Dick, if you don't know the answer to this, no problem. I don't know the answer either, but you're here, so I'm asking you, if this level playing field plays out and the small country, let's say of Slovenia, has interesting technology that renders it a world player on the global stage, just like the US might have technology at the same level, do you see countries licensing to each other or acting independently? And so that I mean that we make cultivated meat, Chinese makes their own cultivated meat, Slovenia makes its own cultivated meat, or do we have one global player that makes cultivated meat and we license to each other and we become specialists?
I'd be surprised about the latter. I mean, I'll go back and suggest I don't know.
Yeah, neither do I, folks, to be clear.
But,
yeah.
I mean, my sense is that countries will realize where they are vulnerable from a food perspective and use new technologies to eliminate that vulnerability. So if that means that they're not growing enough, grains, they'll figure out through, vertical agriculture, through these warehouses, ways to do that better. Are they dependent upon another country that will, blackmail them essentially on a diplomatic scale because of food? I think they'll use new technologies to figure out how to ensure that they've got access to the type of food that they need. I mean, you'll look throughout history. I mean, food wars. Or pandemics associated with the lack of good food have toppled all sorts of regimes. Politicians at a high level are quite sensitive to ensuring that their voters, their populace, have access to quality and affordable food.
Yeah, nothing topples a regime like lack of food. So much to uncover here. I just want to say for the record, kind of going back, we were talking so much about blockchain, so I do want to acknowledge the innovator. I'm probably mispronouncing this, Raja Ramachandran.
I think that's very good.
Of ripe.io. So if you're interested, right? Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So if you're interested in learning more about blockchain and the innovation, he comes from banking, the banking world. And so the innovation he's bringing to the banking and the transparency around transactions through blockchain in the food supply system and the ag tech system. Very, very interesting, folks. Okay.
Can I just go off of that? Only because, what I did find when I started looking for innovators is that almost all of them were not related to the current agricultural system. Yeah. They were all outsiders. They were bringing their skill set to food and farm sectors. I mean, particularly in plant and cell-based. I mean, you see this all the time. I mean, all of these people. One used to be a Stanford professor. Uma Valente used to have a residency at the Mayo Clinic, and they're using their knowledge in his case of figuring out how to use stem cells to revitalize people who had heart attacks, to suddenly realize that he could use those stem cells to grow muscle tissue, which is essentially meat. So bringing this outside perspective, this confluence of technologies, going back to Eric Schmidt's comment about what's happening on more of a global scale, I think these outsiders are bringing opportunity and innovation into a sector that has long been conventionalized or undigitalized or unmodernized.
Yeah, and that to me is the part of the creativity in the expression creative destruction. That coming from the outside and looking at the food supply system in a whole new way with a whole new skill set is part of the reason why it's also happening so quickly, is this just influx of creativity, which is so fascinating. Okay, so we talked a little bit about regaining the consumer's trust. And I have found in the studies that I've read that while generally there's a lot of decent, prolific lip service to, I don't want technology in my food, the flip side is also true, that people are very ready to say, I sort of don't care where my meat is grown as long as I still get to have my meat. So in the studies that I've seen, the adoption curve to cultivated meat is pretty much a no-brainer. I don't know if you've seen anything.
Oh, it's extraordinary.
Yeah.
I think Although I think you will find big meat will use whatever
Sure.
means they can think of to try and protect their own market, to diss the supposed problems with plant-based or cell-based, meats. But I mean, look at this industry. I mean, you know this better than I do. Just within the last few years, it went from something that hardly any consumer knew about to
Right.
something that, at least on the plant-based side, 70% or so of us have already tried it.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
In such a short amount of time. So
Yeah,
think,
so the technology is coming quickly, the adoption is coming quickly, and the crisis mode that we're all running in, still in coronavirus technically, and the climate change becoming exasperated on a daily basis. It's just fueling things at a faster rate than I think we could have even imagined. So we touched on this before, I think, but I don't know if we ever really got to it. So I'd like to go back to it. What do you think will survive? So you don't have to single any one individual out, but you've got these 25 folks who are all working on very different technologies in the ag food sector. What do you think is going to survive, and what technologies do you think won't make it?
whew, that's a tough one. I guess the amount of progress that's happened on the plant and cell-based side, as you well know, has just been extraordinary. So it's sort of hard to think that that's going to be retarded. The only thing I think that could stand in its way is the industry itself, if it is not careful about quality control and transparency. Those are going to be key. If in fact they get bit in the that growth will have a real problem. So the industry has to police itself to ensure that its claims of sustainability and equity are in fact real and can be shown. The other places that I think that will succeed are on relatively low cost, ways of changing farming, of empowering farmers so that they have more options to keep their farms and make them available to their own children. So on some, the more expensive technologies, such as these autonomous robots that are going out into fields and through artificial intelligence, visualizing which are going to be broccoli and which little nubs are going to be pigweed, and then coming through and scooping them out. It's amazing technology. I mean, it's far advanced from what, Google or Facebook do for our own face recognition. That's expensive stuff, but it's phenomenal as to what it can do as far as getting rid of horrible labor. Weeding fields is just got to be one of the worst jobs out there as far as just the toil and pain associated with it, a drudgery. But also getting rid of the herbicides and pesticides that are so associated with conventional agriculture. So that one is one of those ones on the edge. Can the cost of that come down so that the average farmer can avoid it? I don't know. But I think that's where the issue of scaling and bringing costs down is going to have to be necessary. Those entrepreneurs that are able to do both of those, I think, are the ones that are going to succeed.
Yeah, scaling always such a critical thing for any industry. We see that as well. Cultivated meat. It used to be $300,000 or something like that for a Mark Post cultivated meat hamburger out of Holland.
Less than a decade ago.
Yes, right. Less than a decade. Yes, yeah, exactly right.
And it's down to what?
12,000 or something, or even less.
It was 325,000. It's down. It's within the single digits as far as what it takes to do it. So I mean, the change has been remarkable. Can it keep up? Again, I go back. In part, the industry has to be really good about policing itself and being straightforward and transparent. But the trends are phenomenal.
Yeah, my only concern is, I look at how the industry lost control of the word organic. And they lost control of the concept of GMOs. Now, GMOs can be nefarious, but they aren't always. And in many ways, they're revolutionary. In many ways, I would say, I don't know how you're going to feed 10 billion people by 2050 without GMOs, at least at the seed stage, to have more prolific growth, et cetera. So I see them as necessary, and I don't see them as necessarily evil, but I know a lot of people do, and I don't know how to get that conversation back. So I feel like if you've lost control of the conversation with the public, it's very hard to get it back. And I don't want that to happen for these industries.
Well, one caution that I ran into from some folks is this issue of feeding 10 billion people as an excuse to continue the conventional ways of farming. That freaks out some entrepreneurs because they would point out the fact that we currently grow enough calories to feed 10 billion people. It's just that 40% of it is wasted. Another 20%, I forget the exact number, is used to inefficiently, get proteins through, cattle or, chickens. So you have to be very careful about how you define what your problem is that you're trying to solve, so that I guess you open up the door for innovation and progress.
So let me just make sure I understand what you're saying, and I think I do. It's not the growing population that's the problem. It's the using our resources efficiently enough now, today, forget 2050, to make the most of our food output. So ultimately, we want higher quality food at higher quantities made with fewer resources in a shorter amount of time.
Exactly right.
And we can...
That's hard to do, but again, it defines the problem differently. Instead of thinking that all I have to do is grow more calories, and therefore I need to, cut down the Amazonian rainforest so that I can have more farms to grow more corn and soybeans so I can feed more cattle. That's not the way to frame this. We've got the calories being grown out there. Can we get them done efficiently, and can we waste significantly less? Wasting 40% is a phenomenal number. So yes, how you define that problem, you're obviously doing it through your, this podcast, not this one, but I mean, throughout your series. But that's a critical issue to ensure that we're framing it correctly.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I would actually argue that if you were to not frame it the way we have done, and you were to just say, "Hey, we need to grow more corn to feed more cows because we have more people," you're just not going to have enough land to do that. The math of that equation is untenable. It actually doesn't work. And it's very simple math. You can do it on the back of a napkin. You can see like we're running out of land as it is now. Of the agricultural land, I get this data from ourworlddata.org. Of the agricultural land that we have at our disposal, we use 77% of it to raise animals, and that gives us 18% of our calories.
Yep.
The flip side is true. We use 23% of our agricultural land to grow grains, et cetera, and that gives us 82% of our calories. So why are we misusing our resources like that? And ultimately, why are we giving food to food? If you want to be efficient, just give food to food.
The status quo is that we continue on the path of burning down more rainforests to plant more farms and more corn. And that's just has to stop. I mean, not only from an environmental perspective, which is where I sort of come from, of thinking about what we're doing to biodiversity and to climate change and overuse of antibiotics. I mean, you can go across the board of the problems.
Never ending.
But the default has been, let's just make more farms wherever we possibly can and move on and just keep growing more and more, rather than thinking about how do we do it efficiently, how do we do it sustainably, how do we do it affordably.
And a smart business equation that makes sense for the world, because it's an existential question at some point. Yeah. When you keep cutting down the trees that pull carbon from the air, and in return, you need them for oxygen as well as carbon sequestration. I mean, do you have your future in mind? It's really, burning down your own house so that you can have a fire at night. You know what I mean? Why would you do that?
That's exactly true.
Yeah, we have to do that. Okay. So maybe this is a perfect time to sort of wrap up with some exit questions. And the first one will be, and maybe you've already answered it, but if you were to say the next 3 years, what are your predictions for the food supply system?
I think we're going to be surprised, is my prediction. We've seen in the last 5 years, I mean, virtually every of the 25 entrepreneurs that I profiled were not doing what they were doing 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So that's, I'm not suggesting my book, is the be all and end all of picking, who the winners are, but just the amount of innovation and change that's happening. I think we'll see new players. Some of the ones that are out there that I profiled are going to be gone, and other ones will replace them. That's fine. That's what, markets do, and particularly, startups being hard. They've got a lot of responsibility of, raising money, marketing, doing the science. So things will change. I think, on the outside there, one of the odder new technologies I came across was something called Foodini. It's a three-dimensional or 3D printer of food. My wife, who's a great chef, sort of goes, "Oh no!" But will that advance? My guess is for not unlike the microwave, which was the last significant contribution to or addition to kitchens. It took about 25 years for it to hit the 90% saturation level. My guess is that for things like pastas and cakes and other sorts of things that a 3D printer can do, it'll probably advance. Will it do everything and replace what my wife does on cooking? No, but I think we'll be surprised about just the acceptance that people will have relative to new options when it comes to food. That I think is going to be the fun part. We won't have just 4 types of potatoes. We might have 20. And we might cook them in different ways. And so, our options grow. And I think, for consumers, it's going to be confusing, but it's also, I think, going to be glorious that we're going to have, an array of heirloom, both tomatoes and potatoes. So I think that's good.
Yeah, I agree with that. Consumers want options. They never say no to more and better options. So the consumer is going to have a very fast adoption is what I predict. And I also predict that what was it called? Mike Tyson had those like little grills that you would put on the countertop. I think everyone's going to have their 3D printer, but it's not in your office. It's in your kitchen. And it's going to make its 5 to 10 things that it makes in the beginning. And it will grow to, have a repertoire of 20, 30 in time. And it will never replace your wife, but it will be really handy.
My goodness.
Yes, yeah, you're in luck there, sir. So stay put where you are. Okay, as we wrap up, what do you wish you knew 10 years ago that you know now?
Oh my goodness, I wish I had been a better investor.
Amen. Yeah.
So, being able to spot emerging trends, and particularly who are the entrepreneurs that can create the combination of marketing, science, scaling, manufacturing that are needed to be a successful startup. I wish I had, the clairvoyance of knowing, even, I guess today, and one of your challenges with your investing is to even now, some of the new players, but will they survive? And are there other new ones that are coming along? Where do you place your own bets? Because in part, what's advancing all of this innovation are people like you and other investors through ETFs or through their own private equity firms, if they're that large, to companies that are going to make a profit by advancing change.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the entrepreneurial skill set of which you speak is so very rare because it does require you to see the forest as well as the trees. And that's just, particularly in today's very chaotic, fast-paced world, it's hard to be able to do short vision and what's it called? You have short and long vision like that. And that's what it really takes for an entrepreneur, as well as being incredibly driven, which is always the sort of the superhero power, I think, of the entrepreneur who's mission aligned or mission driven or has that bold incentive to change the entire global food supply system for humanity as we know it, these sort of sweeping goals, which keeps them so dedicated. Yep. But we talk about it a lot at VegTech Invest for sure, this idea of the trends and where they're going and what technologies are going to become mainstream and in your kitchen, like we talked about with the printer. So very exciting. Okay, so you are running around, you too, very busy in our chaotic lives. You're running around and, your day might not be going as you would like. Is there a phrase that you say to yourself to get yourself back in the groove?
Oh, that's a good one. Well, the one I always say, which is just so corny, I just have to focus. And, the problem is I now, work at home and there's the refrigerator, which is just, down the hall. It's so easy to find. Focus is hard, but, this particular book, and I'm actually working on a new one. It's a biography of Benjamin Franklin. So in both cases, I mean, Franklin is just a joy
Yeah.
because he's, if nothing else, particularly a great inventor, but he's just a witty writer. It's just fun, to come back and focus on, his writings. And in this case of the book Tech to Table was also great because these entrepreneurs, as you note, have this great skill set, this combination, but they're also, kind of odd individuals. I mean, they're driven in a way that sometimes they're, kind of in your face, and, some are not that likable but, we need them to have the faith that they have to be able to achieve the vision that they're seeking. And that is just, I think, really impressive and motivating to be at least around and possibly report on.
Conviction, not for the faint at heart. I have a couple quick comments here. Tom Vincel corrects me and says it's a George Foreman grill, not a Tyson grill. Thank you, Tom. I also want to correct myself. It's near and far vision, far-sighted and nearsighted. So that's what I was trying to refer to. And then lastly, I'll just give a plug to Benjamin Franklin, who's such a fascinating individual. He was a journalist. I don't know if many people know that. He was an entrepreneur running newspapers and being sort of very competitive in his, I don't want to say he did yellow journalism kind of stuff, but he was pretty crafty about what he said and sound bite oriented kind of news, let's say, a precursor to perhaps what we have today, as well as being an inventor. So really a jack of all trades, an interesting character. I can't wait to read that book. My very last question for you, and you alluded to it when you said it's hard to focus. You're running around, you don't have time for lunch, or maybe you did have time for lunch, but now you want to break from your writing. What is your go-to snack?
Oh, I like baked potatoes.
Anything on them?
Butter.
No, sir. No. Have you tried Miyoko's vegan butter?
What's that?
Have you tried Miyoko's vegan butter?
I have not.
Ooh, I recommend it.
But I will.
I do recommend it. Super good.
Right.
Really super, then. Very delicious. And I'll always say, being Sicilian, I'll go to like an old classic Italian, olive oil and salt. Really anything is pretty gosh darn good. So
hard to argue with that observation.
Hard to argue with that. I want to thank you, Dick, for all that you do. This has been a delightful conversation. Thank you for coming on. We had some scheduling snafus and you were persistent and you stayed with it. So I super appreciate that. I want to recommend to everybody Tech to Table. It is on Amazon, amazon.com. You know what that is. It's also other places, of course. You can find it. Is there a website where we can go directly to you?
richardmunson.com.
richardmunson.com. So everybody has their marching orders. They know what to do. It's a really delightful and informative book. If you want to get, we talk so much about food here, but it takes food to the next level of agriculture and general systems change, which is so fascinating. Thank you, Dick, for being with us today.
Thanks very much for having me.
I'm happy to have you. You stay put. Everybody else on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. Thanks for being with me today and all that you do. I will see you all next Tuesday. Bye.